Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Keep wanting to say good morning. Not sure why. I wanted to talk about Marxism briefly. This is going to be the first of a few, I'd say. But I saw I had a video suggested on my YouTube feed of a guy in America talking about Black Lives Matter and Marxism. It was a reaction video to someone, one of the leaders of the official Black Lives Matter group, which is in many ways separate from the Black Lives Matter protests. So she was saying, there's a clip of her saying that they are trained Marxists, and this guy is reacting to that being said, right? I have an issue with that, first of all, because I don't know what trained Marxist means at all. And it didn't sound like she knew what she was talking about either. She kind of listed it off amongst a few things as to why they had a strategy. That's what she was speaking to. Someone was asking her, do they have objectives? Do they have a strategy? Do they have an ideology? And part of her response was that they're trained Marxists. As I say, I don't know what that means, and I came across this kind of phenomenon of anti-Marxism with Jordan Peterson. Now, I respect Jordan Peterson. I just want to say that the person's video, who it was that I came across that initiated this video, is Young Ripper 59. I'll put a link, but it's BLM founder admits they are trained Marxists. It's clear from his reaction that he has no idea what Marxist means. So he equates communism and Marxism and socialism all under the same thing, and never defines what that is at all. I found pretty much the same thing with, I don't know if you've watched it, but if you haven't, you should. I'll put a link as well. The debate between Zizek and Peterson that took place last year, I believe. Really brilliant debate, okay? An amazing debate, capitalism versus Marxism. And Jordan Peterson only had read the Communist Manifesto briefly and was going based on this principle of being anti. So he grouped, within the debate, he grouped all of these things together. So an SJW, social justice warrior, a postmodernist, a postmodern neo-Marxist, a Marxist, a cultural Marxist, and a postmodernist in general. He equated all of those things as exactly the same. Now, of course, they're not, and Zizek absolutely pointed that out. That Peterson refers to Foucault as one of the main people that he's talking about with regard to these things, and of course Foucault is no Marxist. Foucault is absolutely the opposite of a Marxist. His theories really are a critique of Marxism. Everything is written in opposition to Marxism. So postmodernism and Marxism are two different things. So to call a group of people postmodernist neo-Marxists isn't a thing. That is not a thing. As I think it was made clear from that debate. So I want to talk about just some of the issues around Marxism that I've found, and this is just an initial little look, because I am a Marxist. I really, really like a lot of Marx and Engels work, right? But I've read a lot of their work. That's the thing, is I've actually read a lot of their work. Now, you also have two other forms of Marxism, I would say: Trotskyism and Leninist Marxism. Neither of those, I would say, actually represent Marxism, like true Marxism. And I think those forms of Marxism could be seen as cultural Marxism, maybe I could accept that. Because there's more about that than just theory, and that is what Marxism is a sociological economic theory, and we seem to have forgotten that in all of these references to Marxists and Marxism. I'm not sure anyone knows what they're talking about anymore. And I also think to equate socialism with this sort of Maoist communism all the time, and Stalinist communism, those aren't the same things. And I understand from the American history, and probably what I imagine Americans have been taught in history in school, Americans' main perception of socialism and Marxism always comes back to McCarthyism and McCarthy and that form of communism, and that isn't Marxism. At all. And it's the same as the radical feminist thing I was saying in a previous video. To say that you agree with a particular theory shouldn't get you shunned socially in any way. It shouldn't be a marker. It shouldn't be used as a form of virtue signalling. To call yourself a Marxist as a way of virtue signalling brings connotations to Marxism that just shouldn't be there, in my opinion. And Zizek talks about this with regard to, what we see now in the political sphere, which he calls a hypermoralization in so-called neo-Marxism, which he argues, and I agree with, because of the hypermoralization and the extremity of all the arguments coming from those groups, it does imply defeat, because they're demanding things that just can't ever be achieved. Equality for all is an impossible thing, and it's not what Marxism actually espouses either, and it seems to be that principle that everyone's stuck with, that if everyone's going to be equal, then we can be equally on a low standing. That seems to be the Republican particularly standpoint, and I understand that from having looked at, you know, Maoist communism and Stalinist Russia. Yeah, for sure, there's an issue there, but that wasn't Marxism. That was authoritarian rule, and Marx is very clear that that can't be. That's not socialism, you know. Yeah, so it's interesting that I also find it interesting that people often equate Marxism with like very socially liberal ideals and sort of liberal elitism, which happens certainly in some groups. Liberalism, again, doesn't go in line with Marxism at all, and I think you can see that critique from Marx in his it's called the 18th Brumaire, and I'll put a link as well probably for that for online, because it's a brilliant analysis of the failed revolution in France, where everyone else, not everyone, but where a lot of people claimed that to be a successful revolution for liberal ideals and for the proletariat because of that, he completely breaks that down and shows how that became a bourgeoisie revolution. So I'm not entirely sure what people are arguing against when they're arguing against Marxism anymore. If you're arguing against Stalinist policy, cool, fine. If you're arguing against Trotskyism, that's a very particular sect of Marxism and isn't representative of most Marxism at all. And so Zizek pointed to David Harvey and Frederick Jameson as two genuine Marxists working within the academic sphere at the moment. David Harvey particularly is an economist that I really, really like. And that's true, what I would call true Marxism in the modern sphere. And I think that's what we should be, I think that's what people should be aware of when they're arguing against Marxism. Because Marxism isn't about equality of outcome at all. In fact, a lot of his work really, really explicitly says that just won't ever be the case. But he does ask whether, well, he puts forward that most definitely the system as we have it, I mean, his main thing is that if law and if society's rules are based on the exclusion of others from property that you own, which is the basis for law, this is going to create an unequal thing in life. And another brilliant oh no, I can't think of the full name of it. It's something to do with the theft of wood. And if you want to look that up, I'll find it and I'll link it. But he brilliantly analyses why that kind of a setup of a system will always necessarily create inequalities that can't be remedied simply through hard work and, you know, pulling your socks up. That's the basis of Marxism. It's not that hard to understand, and nor is it it's not something to be offended by. It is just a theory. It's just a theory. Same way capitalism is just a theory. I see all the time, and I saw this from that guy who prompted this video. What we always hear is communism, the deaths that have happened under communism, you can't argue with. No one ever looks at the deaths under capitalism, like literally the deaths that have already resulted from capitalism and that continue. Slavery resulted from capitalism. You know, like the working class in English factories, a lot of child deaths occurred from that. We don't talk about that. The refugee crisis that we have at the moment, we don't talk about that. The African people who are dying because they've been severely underfunded and made to rely on aid from rich countries and made to pay back debt that doesn't actually exist to rich countries. No one talks about that. We haven't talked about AIDS exceptionalism in Africa and the fact that Africa has been used as a testing ground for medical practices for years. We don't talk about any of those deaths and casualties to come out of capitalism, but everyone's very quick to talk about Stalin. And that, I think we need to remind ourselves as well. Like, capitalism kills people. Just look at, like, the people who are emigrating now because literally, like, islands are going underwater because of like climate change and stuff. We've deforested so much of the world. I imagine microplastics within our rain and our sea is going to eventually kill people. I mean, just pollution within city centres, looking at how much that kills people. No one talks about those things, and I think, you know, if you're going to have a genuine, honest debate about capitalism versus Marxism, let's look at those things too. Like, capitalism isn't working, really, you know, because again, people who criticize Marxism argue that there's no way of socially gaining social mobility. But does capitalism really support that? And you can't always point to the exception to the rule, you know? I mean, you could very much argue that if Venezuela hadn't had the sanctions that it did, that form of communism or socialism or whatever you want to call it probably will have saved a lot of lives. So I think the majority of people who are having debates about Marxism, even the self-declared Marxists, the majority of them don't know what they're talking about. And they've attached themselves to quite an extreme ideology because it feels good to denounce others and be a part of this sort of, you know, dynamic group and all of that. But it's not actually Marxism, and I just wanted to put that out there because I keep seeing people having arguments about Marxism when what they're talking about is not Marxism. Yeah, I'll probably go into Marx and Engels particularly at another point because they're two of my favourite people. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there because it seems to be coming up a lot because of Black Lives Matter, and yeah, we're not having real discussions, the majority of us. Anyway.